So Monday is here. Once again, we are back with Through the Haze. And genuinely, these Monday Through the Hazes may be my favorite. And the reason is quite simple. It's because we have got a lot of college football we need to talk about. And what a weekend we were just treated to. We have some upsets we need to get to. We have some close games we need to get to. We need to talk about a coach that just a few years ago was riding a high, and now he is riding a low. We need to react to the AP poll. We need to get into my game of the week. And as always, I have got to hear from all of you. So as you're hopping in here, Shadow already in here, Mark already in here. Glad you guys are here. Hopefully you enjoyed your weekend. Hopefully you enjoyed your Texas Longhorns victory. We've got a lot to talk about. And where do we begin? I think one of the ways we can begin is highlighting a game that not many people are going to be talking about, highlighting a game that had me on the edge of my seats, and highlighting a game that, quite frankly, we need to highlight a specific team. And we're going to start with my game of the week. And there are several different ways to answer this question as you're trickling in here. I want to hear from you. I want to hear what your game of the week was, what a weekend it was. But for me personally, it's a game I predicted wrong on our Bleacher Report stream, and that's Oregon State, Arizona. And in fact, props to Jay. Jay got this game right, and if I'm not mistaken, I think he's the only one of the four that got this game right. We need to talk about Arizona. This is a team that after they had their quarterback situation get rattled, they have been playing high-level football. They have played several teams really close, and this past weekend, they squeak out a win against a top 15 team. Arizona has been hyper impressive this year. That defense is for real, and they're a team that I'm excited to see continue to grow, continue to try and add in talent. And it's going to be an interesting addition to the Big 12 whenever they finally get there. Look, Arizona, I think this year is a team that not many people are talking about. Everybody's overlooking, but if you get the opportunity, I would highly recommend taking the time, watching the game. In fact, if you get the opportunity, I'd highly recommend you watch that Oregon State game, because Oregon State has been a really good team this year. In fact, the Pac-12 has been phenomenal this year. If we just want to call a spade, the Pac-12 has been phenomenal. And one of the bright spots within the Pac-12 has been Arizona. And I don't think anybody saw that coming. So the Arizona team, this is a team we're going to have to pay attention to. This is a team we're going to have to watch. If they haven't been on your radar, I think you need to change that. They are absolutely a team you need to be on the lookout for. Let's hit some comments. We have Shadow Mark in here. He says, interesting week ahead. LSU coming to town, and OU has to figure out how they're going to stop Okie Light's run game. You meant KSU for Texas. Yeah, that's going to be a good one, man. Eric says, Ty, I told you that OU would lose this game. Yeah, I mean, I don't remember why you thought they'd lose, but I do think you said it. I'm to be honest, man, there's so much that happens in my week. But yeah, we're going to get to the OU one. I'm honestly more excited about next year, all the changes, just being honest. Yeah, I mean, I hear you. I'd be excited about this year if I was you, because next year, I mean, sometimes change is good, but sometimes change is change, right? And sometimes change can be hard to overcome. He says, this is why we can't wait for the 12-team playoff. Good teams deserve to fight for a national championship too, even if they started off a little slow. Shadow, you know me, man. I like the 4-team playoff format. And listen, I think that we'll make it work with the 12-team format. But I also think that college football is better than every other sport because of the importance we put on the regular season, right? Like, because of every single Saturday is essentially a playoff game in college football. That's what separates college football, is that your play-in tournament everybody talks about, the March Madness everybody talks about. That's pretty much what your regular season. You get 2 losses, and that's it. I mean, that's all she wrote. And I like the emphasis on the regular season. I like the meritocracy that right now college football embodies. Now, listen, that's not to say that the 12-team playoff is going to kill college football. Honestly, I think a lot of the concerns are overblown, and I will admit, even some of my concerns are just me being a boomer. I'll be the first to admit that. It's just a preference thing, but I don't think you're wrong. It will be more entertaining. I mean, let's be honest, it will be more entertaining when we get to that part of the season. It'll undoubtedly, Shadow, be a better product when we get to December. No doubts there. No doubts there at all. If Texas doesn't beat up on KSU, there's a chance Bama leaps ahead in the polls and playoff ranks. Yeah, Mark, because I think if they did that, like, listen, I know that a lot of people have been mad at like Josh Pate's polls where he says where if those two teams played right now on a neutral field, who would win? I think right now, well, especially with Quinn not being there, so especially right now, Bama would be favored, I think, on a neutral field. Now, when Quinn gets back, I think it's a different story. But it is going to be interesting because Texas, I think they do need to get one of those big beat up wins. That being said, you handled BYU. It wasn't pretty, but you handled it, right? Like sometimes you don't need to win pretty, you just need to win. And you did that. And you did that. So hats off to the Longhorns for that right there. Let's step ahead. We are going to we're going to talk about Oklahoma right now. I think it's a good time. Because like Eric said, Eric predicted the loss last week. But we need to talk about why this loss happened. Because this was a perplexing game. And in fact, after the game, I streamed with Jason of Hall of Fame Media and Chris Griffin of the Horns Down podcast. And we broke down this game and why we thought that the Oklahoma Sooners had lost. And instant reaction, it was very easy to say, oh, it was the offense. And even after having rewatched the game, I think that the offense is a major component as to why Oklahoma lost this game. And in order for us to understand that, allow me to first kind of explain this type of offense. Because I've seen so many people on Twitter, we had so many people during the stream kind of asking, why is Lebby continually doing these jet sweeps? Why are we continually going east and west? It's because this Lebby offense is foundational, right? It relies on using building blocks to then get to a point where you can build a house. And the building blocks I'm referring to a lot of the times come in the form of those jet sweeps, come in the forms of some of your pre-snap motion and attacking the edges, doing these little creative wrinkles because you're just trying to spread a defense out. You're just trying to be able to lay the foundations to be able to get a downfield passing attack going, to get a rushing attack going, and put a defense on their heels as opposed to a defense that's playing on the balls of their feet. You want a defense on their heels. The problem came against Kansas where we never saw the transition from foundational into attack. And that right there was perplexing. You didn't see Dylan Gabriel throw the ball a whole lot because you kept seeing them try these running plays, which, credit where it's due. A lot of the times the running plays were working, especially with Tawee Walker. But it never transitioned, in my opinion, from being building block foundational plays into something that you could say, okay, now we're making this defense think what's coming next. It never got to that point. Kansas was able to fairly reliably tell what Oklahoma wanted to do because Oklahoma got fairly repetitive. Now, let's understand one thing here. I do not put the entire blame after having rewatched the game on Jeff Lebby. I can't. And understand this is a reason as to why. Because whenever we did that live stream, one of the things that even I conceded at the time, that last touchdown Kansas scored where they drove down the field with 1 minute and 56 seconds left in the game to take the lead. After that first happened, my first inclination was to say, yeah, that OU defense, they'd been on the field a lot, right? Like the OU offense, they hadn't been very good. They hadn't been very consistent, and they were asking a lot of that Oklahoma defense. And, you ask a lot of a certain unit over 4 quarters, they can slip up because you're asking so much of them. And that was my first thought whenever Kansas drove down the field with 1 minute and 56 seconds left, got that score to take the go-ahead lead. When I rewatched the game, I have a different thought because that instance, that series where Kansas went down with less than 2 minutes in the 2-minute drill and scored, that was not a one-off. That was not simply a microcosm of a different game. That was the game. In fact, we can talk about how in the first half, Oklahoma went on a 21-point streak. Went up 21-14 after Kansas had 14 points straight. Then OU goes 21 points unanswered. You got that 21 points because your special teams made a play. They made a mistake. You got the ball in short field. You score. They march right down on your defense. So that wasn't a one-off. Kansas was able to consistently move the football. And then one of the most perplexing things to me was the way Oklahoma ended the half. This is an attack offense. You have been able to move the ball whenever you've gotten in sequence, and you take a timeout. Or you don't take a timeout. I apologize. You go into half with 3 timeouts on the board. It appeared to me, as much as Lebby let the team down, and I think that the offense is certainly where we put the blame. And the reason I say that, look, I never went to law school, but I did have enough undergraduate legal classes and enough moot court and worked in enough law firms to understand a phrase that if you've been around the legal system at all, you know all too well. But if not for, and I keep going back to that, but if not for some of the inconsistencies in Jeff Lebby's play calling, Oklahoma wouldn't have been in a better position to win this game. And I truly think that was the big issue. But I also cannot absolve some of the situational play calling in this game. Some of it didn't make much sense at all. Highlighting the 3 timeouts left on the board. I thought you could attack. You could have done some things. And let's hit some comments because I think you guys are right on the money. Captain in here, he says, Lebby's play calling, Venables taking the timeout on the punt in the second half, and Biedenbau's offensive line rotations were key issues in my opinion. Captain, I think you hit the nail on the head. And if I may, I'd like to expand on your last point a little bit, because this is something I've echoed when we've talked about the Alabama offensive line. Alabama's offensive line has been ugly, but there are other reasons for the sacks than just simply it being poor offensive line play. In fact, in my opinion, it's a fascinating conversation to have because of how nuanced it is. Yes, a fair share of it relies on the offensive line and their inadequacies. No doubt about that. You're not going to hear an argument from me about the inconsistent play of the Alabama offensive line. No doubt there. But we also have to acknowledge maybe sometimes holding the ball too long. Bailing, or, you have a mobile quarterback, he escapes into pressure. Those things have been consistently happening. But one of the issues with Bama's offensive line is they keep playing musical chairs. We are in week 8. Settle on a rotation and go. And it may not be the best, but offensive line requires so much gelling that playing musical chairs, Captain, I agree. And this is me looking at what I've seen from Alabama, and I think you could 1-to-1 take that same analysis and flip it. I completely agree because I have felt the same way about the Crimson Tide. And I understand the coach's position. It's not working. You feel like you have something in your offense, right? Because as much as Alabama's offense has been all over the place, it hasn't been great. When it is working, you see glimpses of something that you're like, if they can piece it together like a puzzle, there's something there. I don't know that it's going to be the number 1 offense in the nation, but it has the makings of, at the very least, a dangerous offense. They're still a ways away, but you see it more and more every week. So I think the Oklahoma coaching staff looks at their offense and sees it much the same way, which is why they're willing to play these musical chairs, because they're like, okay, we do feel like we are that close. But I think there's also a negative side. And I think that sometimes that can come where these guys just need to gel. That's why at a certain point, Captain, I said the same thing about Caden Proctor. He's a true freshman. He's having a rough season. Bama kept switching him and Elijah Pritchett out, and the results weren't much different. And that's when I was just like, you know what? Just let the true freshman go out there. Because at least if someone's getting heated up, I'd rather it be my true freshman getting heated up than my sophomore who's been in the system for a year, who's been in the strength and conditioning program for a year, and in all technicality should be a year ahead of where Caden Proctor is. If they're at the same time, or if they're at the same stage, I'm going to roll with the young guy and just kind of allow him to know we're behind you, right? We're here. But yeah, I think musical chairs, that's huge. Defense was poor, but they made enough plays to win this game. I do agree with that. I also agree with that. That's why I go back to, but if not for the offensive inconsistencies. And I do think that is the major point of this conversation. No doubt there. They got put in bad situations a lot. True. Made me lose. Yeah. Did the weather force OU to not run their up-tempo offense, or do you just think it was a choice before the game? I think the weather certainly played a part, Shadow. I think the weather certainly played a part. I don't think there's any doubt about that. You start running around in that sloshy environment, things can get slippery. I think it definitely played a part. But to then let the weather completely dictate the rest of your game when Kansas was still being Kansas. And that Shadow, I think, is a point that we need to expand upon. I can understand the play calling being affected by the weather. I get that. Because earlier this year when Bama played UCF, I don't know if y'all remember, I've talked about this. They had to come out after the weather break and repaint the field. It rained so hard. Bama's offense was terrible that game. Part of the reason was they couldn't throw the football. It was raining so hard. But for Oklahoma, Kansas, whenever we look at this game, you're not wrong, Shadow. And I do think that is a real point, that the weather certainly affected what Oklahoma wanted to do. But a certain point, you have got to get back to playing Oklahoma football and not bad weather football. You want to know why? Because at a certain point, Kansas got back to doing what they were doing. It was raining. They asked Bean to throw it, 32 times? It was raining. They never stopped their pre-snap motions. They never stopped some of their intricate play calling. I can understand. I think there was a period where they certainly relied on their run a little bit more, Shadow, but at the end of the day, they were still able to be Kansas. And I don't think that Oklahoma was able to be Oklahoma on offense. Eric says, Ty, OU might lose again this weekend. If they play the way they played against Kansas, they may. They may. I don't expect that to happen. But yeah, listen, at the end of the day, I completely agree. I think Captain hit the nail on the head. There's blame to go around. The majority of the blame, I think, falls on the offense, because I do believe that your defense, they won sequences in this game that were so big that it should have took you to victory. Yeah, and this is what I mean, Eric, right? Like, both teams played in the same conditions, and I can completely get where that would get you out of your game plan. But at a certain point, Kansas was able to get back to Kansas football and what Kansas wanted to do as an offense. Oklahoma wasn't. And that, the weather only goes so much into that. Yeah, that's wild. I didn't know that, Chicken. I didn't know that. Yep, exactly, TB, exactly. Bishop, thank you for being in here. Salute, man, salute. I bet my car title I can beat Levy at Madden. I don't. Yeah. I don't know if I'd bet that. No way a wide receiver should be taking snaps out the backfield. I agree, Crane, but I think this gets us into another conversation we need to have about Oklahoma. The running back room is just not playing very well right now. And there are several different reasons for why. I think that the blocking is super inconsistent. But right now, just watching, you have one running back that looks like he needs to be the guy, and then a bunch of other guys trying to figure out how to be the guy. Listen, I can agree with that. And Captain, I gotta get your take on this. So I do need you in here for give me 5 more minutes, right? Give me 5 more minutes. I need your take. If you go back and watch that play, doesn't that entire play design seem like it was made for a right-handed quarterback? Let me explain. Allow me to explain real fast, Captain. Because on that play, his third read, which was Farouk, is a 6-yard hitch. That's a tough pass to have as your third read when read number 1, Anderson on the outside, looked like a deep post. Then he did throw it way too late. There's no doubt about that. But I don't know. I'm interested in your take on this. You had the deep post on the outside. You had the stoop slant. You had the tight end doing a little clear out. And then you had the 6-yard hitch. It seems to me that play call inherently is designed for a right-handed quarterback, because that 6-yard hitch, that ball's got to come out the second Farouk plants his foot to come back. That ball's got to be coming out. It's hard to do that when that's read number 3. Yeah, and then to take it a step further, if we actually go down the chain of events, right, and look at the totality of circumstances, it makes far more sense for that 6-yard hitch to be read number one, because you go from the hitch to the slant and then the tight end route. Wow, I'm on a rant and I said tight end route. You go from the hitch to the slant to the tight end little clear out, which forces your strong safety to come forward. Your free safety already bit. He was already coming down. Both safeties bit on that. And then you have Anderson on a deep post. If that's your last read, that's a touchdown. That's a touchdown. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. If that play, it to me, it looked like it was called for a right-handed quarterback. It didn't make much sense to me because all of the progressions looked to me like they were setting up the deep post as opposed to a 6-yard hitch, which has got to come out instantly. Got to come out instantly. It was just odd. Like I saw that pick. I'll tell you what had me think this, Captain. I saw that pick and I was like, whose fault is this? Is it DG's or Levy's? And instantly I was like, it's DG's. He shouldn't have thrown that ball. That ball was so late. You cannot throw that. And DG, you're too good of a quarterback. You're too smart. You're too good. You play too good. That's not like, come on, you know better. But then the more I kept watching the play, I was like, something about this doesn't sit right to me. Something about the way this play, it looks like it was called for a right-handed quarterback, to be honest. And I could be overthinking it, right? I told Jay this weekend I'm either an idiot or an idiot genius, and I'm relying on number one to be the truth. I'm probably an idiot. There's someone. Oh no, Tijuana. Oh no. Farouk made no effort to pursue. Yeah, listen, I don't know. You're not wrong, TB. I saw that, but at the point where that young man that jumped that route, he was in a dead sprint. There's nothing Farouk could have done. There was nothing Farouk could have done. So I hear you. You always want to see that effort, but that ball was so late. That kid was already at a dead sprint. There's not Farouk's a hell of an athlete, but there was nothing he could have done. Ty, long-time viewer, first-time commenting. Oh, you got here. You being totally unbiased in your opinion, do you think we'll be in the top half of the conference kind of team in the move to the SEC? I think you have a good opportunity to. Look, Oklahoma's recruiting very well, and we have to understand right now there's some movement in the SEC. You look at Arkansas, there's some major questions about Pittman. Right now, I love what Beamer is doing at South Carolina, but there's no denying that there are some major questions about the future of South Carolina, right? I mean, their offensive line right now is atrocious. They're really riding Spencer Rattler, but how much longer is he going to be there? And then you're talking about a team that right now is in games and winning games off the back of Rattler's production. He's not there. You need a special quarterback. I don't know that they have that just sitting in the wing. That's not to say that Beamer's not recruiting really well. You can recruit really well. It's the same question I have for USC. I think Malachi Nelson's going to be a star. Are you going to be Caleb? Because right now that's what it's taking it's what's taking USC to win games. So there's two teams right there. You look at Florida. I think Florida is trending in the right direction, but I also think Billy Napier's taking his own time doing this. And that's not to say like taking a long time, but his kind of rebuild happened in year 2. We look at Missouri. That's a really veteran team. Missouri is one of the coolest stories in all of college football right now, but that is a seriously experienced team. What did they look like absent that experience? Going to be interesting to see, but they're recruiting very well right now. And hats off. That NIL law certainly helps out in their recruiting. How that NIL law, how long it will be legal is beyond me. Tijuana, I know you commented the other day talking about antitrust as it relates to that NIL law. But at the same time, the reason why I'm not worried about antitrust when it comes to that, because if we really want to talk about the antitrust laws that could affect college football, then the current capacity of college football wouldn't exist. So antitrust as it pertains to college football has meant apparently nothing for so long. And Justice Kavanaugh pointed that out to the NCAA, and they're still operating largely under the same guise that they once were. Very little has changed. So you're not wrong, Tijuana, as far as traditionally speaking, that law should be illegal. The problem is the NCAA in their entire existence has been able to operate outside the scope of traditional antitrust law, which then brings into question any sort of other antitrust law. going into it. Listen, Devil, you have a good coach, man. I like Todd Bates. I like Brent Venables. He's young. He's still learning. He's only in year 2, but I like the way he instantly hit the podium and owned the loss, whether it was on him or not. Whether it was on him or not. I like that because that's a leader. I mean, just being honest, that's a leader. Hitting the podium and being like, I know that people were fired up about Lebby, and he was like, no, the buck stops with me. I didn't do this. And he had a list. Whether you believe it or not is a different story. That's a leader. That's a leader, right? Like, I have some respect for that. Whether you believe him, whether you agree with him or not, that's irrelevant to me. You live by the sword, you die by the sword. And I like Venables. Then you have Jackson Arnold. I really like Jackson Arnold. And Devil, you have to understand, I'm biased to a degree for players like Jatavian Sanders, Anthony Hill, Billy Bowman, Peyton Bowen, Eli Bowen when he gets in college, Jackson Arnold, because they're from Denton. I graduated from UNT. I live in Denton. So the players that come from Denton, I'm going to be very biased towards. But I'll always admit that. I will always admit that. So I think, listen, I think that the SEC is in an interesting position. Bama is still Bama-ing, right? Like they're still a top 10 team. They're still a top team in the nation right now, and they're building, right? And that's the scary thing about Bama is where they were week 1, week 2, week 3 is not where they are right now. And that defense is getting to be real disgusting. And they've got some youth on that team. Georgia recruits very well. Tennessee is kind of going through a little up and down period right now. We have to ask what will happen with Kentucky. Leary is a veteran quarterback. So look, Oklahoma and Texas are actually coming to the SEC at a beautiful time. Right now, Jaden Daniels is killing it at LSU. He's not going to be there much longer. That being said, ladies and gentlemen, I do have to give credit where it's due. I really like LSU's backup quarterback, Nussmeier. Listen, I don't know. Obviously, they'll have to develop a more traditional rushing attack, which in credit to LSU, they have been able to do as the season has gone on. But with Nussmeier, I mean, that kid's going to be dangerous. That kid's going to be dangerous just down the road for me in Flower Mound, where he's from. So I think you're coming to the SEC at a beautiful time. You're not coming to the SEC 3 or 4 years ago where it was like, oh, there's ramp up right now, right? Like you're coming to the SEC in a period of transition. And I think that's a beautiful timing. Beautiful timing on that. Ty, will USC lose 2 or 3 more this season? They look terrible on defense. Let's talk about USC, my man. USC, they didn't fall again. They squeaked by. That tile is from last week. Ignore that. USC squeaks a win out against Cal. And to answer your question, Eric, I'm going to go ahead and call it right now. Yes, I do think USC loses some more games. I do. I just do. And I can, when I pull up their schedule, I'll point you exactly to the games I just don't think they're going to come out on top of. Because you struggle with Cal. Right? You struggle with Cal. You lose to Utah. You lose to Notre Dame. I don't see them beating Washington. I don't see them beating Oregon. And them beating UCLA is a toss-up, man. So, I mean, I have them losing 2 of their final 3 for sure. And I'm up in the air about UCLA. I'm up in the air about it because that defense is disgusting out there. Jay in here says they have Washington and Oregon. They might lose both, but I can see them upsetting one of them. Possibly, man. Possibly. I'll give you that. And you know the crazy thing, Jay? I can't believe I think if they were to upset one, I don't think it would be Oregon. But I can't see them upsetting Washington either. But Washington has been a bit more laissez-faire here recently. So if I had to pick one, I can't believe I'm saying this because I've been such a big Washington supporter for the past, I mean, Jay, since last year, I've been, but Washington would be the one. If they caught one of them, it'd be Washington, I think. Oregon is playing really well. Oregon responded to that loss really well. I think, guys, I think Oregon might be a damn good football team. A damn good football team. I'm having a ton of fun watching them. And Dan Lanning, man, he's a hell of a coach. He's going to be a fun coach to watch. I think Oregon got one, man. Young guy, but I think they got one. And he's going to be interesting to watch as he continues on down his path, especially with the transition next year. Yeah. I think Oregon got one, man. Oregon is firing on all cylinders, and I expect them to win the Pac. Yeah, listen, if you would have asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have doubled down, especially after Washington beat them, that the answer was Washington. I'd have doubled down. I'd have been like hosting an around the table debate segment, and we could have had a lot of fun. But I'd have been but week by week, I'm moving off of my position. And I don't think that it's Washington anymore. I think that you're right. And I think, Eric, I think you're right. Washington at USC, if we have to say they're going to split Washington, Oregon, I think you're right. I do. That Oregon team, man. And I'll tell you what, I'll tell y'all something about Dan Lanning that I really like. He's a gutsy one, man. Like he is. And I understand. You will, whenever you have a coach like Dan Lanning, where you're that gutsy, you will have games like that Washington game where after the game, you're hearing a bunch of, had he done this, had he done that, had this happened, a different result would have been seen, which isn't necessarily untrue. But at the same time, if you're a player for Dan Lanning, you love that he constantly bets on one thing and one thing only, his guys. Like that right there has been Dan Lanning's biggest faults, is sometimes his play calling is head scratching because he's betting on his dudes. And if you're a player for Dan Lanning, look, you might be sitting there after the game like, I wish we would have done this. We had momentum. We got a little aggressive. I don't know that we needed to go for the knockout shot right there because they pulled and countered and really got us up. But he bet on you. And he always bets on you. And listen, I think that's the mark of a young coach, but it is something I really respect, man. I really, really respect how much he very visibly values his team, values his players, and is willing to bet on his guys. I love it. I gotta say, Dan Lanning, man, really fun young coach. Excited to see what the future holds for him. Very excited to see what the future holds for him. I think Oregon wins out. I agree. I do agree. Maybe they'll get Washington again for the Pac-12 championship on a neutral field. Personally, that's my perfect scenario for the Pac-12. Eric, I think that would be amazing. I think that would be awesome. I've had so much fun for over a year now watching this Washington team play, and the defense has gotten better on Washington. I mean, it's I'm not saying it's a top 10 defense. I'm not saying it's a top 15 defense, but it is a defense that, like, there's a massive difference between the lack of defense at USC and the defense they play at Washington, right? Like, neither one of them are exactly going to bring home any awards. You can win a game with one of them. I don't know that you're winning a game with that USC defense, respectfully. Spot on with Lanning, dude. So, yeah, man. Jay, I'm a fan. I'm a fan. If the worst thing I can say about you is I question your situational play calling, but in the very act of questioning your situational play calling, you come to the realization that you're not being passive. You're not being reserved. You're betting on your guys. I sleep a little easier at night, personally. All right. This is interesting right here, ladies and gentlemen. Because there is a team out there right now that is reeling, and it's Clemson. It's Clemson. And we need to talk about this. Clemson is now 4-4. They are not playing well. And interestingly enough, on a year where DJU goes to Oregon State, Clemson gets a new offensive coordinator. DJU is the one who is putting up massive offensive numbers, and Oregon State is having tremendous success. they've been a wildly fun team to watch this year. If you haven't gotten to check them out, I would highly recommend rewatching some of their games. It's been magic. It's been awesome. Had a blast. I don't think there's a person out there that would have truly believed that Oregon State would be primed for better offensive numbers than Clemson. But that's where we sit. And we now have got to talk about the crossroads that Clemson and, by extension, Dabo Swinney finds himself at. Dabo Swinney is a great coach. It's fine. We can acknowledge that. I'm sure Dabo Swinney runs a solid program because all the guys that come through there, in fairness, you hear them talk about culture, culture, culture. That word permeates through every interview you hear. So listen, that's great. You need a good culture. And the kids that go there, the kids that commit there, they are bought in. Bought in. So listen, to be able to instill that culture is awesome. Awesome. I mean, let's be honest. That's what half the country wants to do, is have kids that bought in. But that's only half the job, ladies and gentlemen. Recruiting is only a microcosm of a larger job. You got to go win football games, and you can be a good coach, but are you adapting to the times? And for Dabo Swinney, the answer is overwhelmingly no, he's not. And understand this. Just a few years ago, you have such an interesting dichotomy because you had Nick Saban, who was so mad about these tempo offenses, and he did not think they were good for the sport. He did not think it was good for player safety, but he adapted because he realized I can sit here and be mad about it all I want. But if they're able to do it, what good does me being mad about it do? Am I just going to sit there and take it? Am I going to retire? What am I going to do? Because a pivot is necessary. So what did Nick Saban do? He went out and he gets Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian. They come in there, they rewrite the offense. And by extension, his defense is also modernized. Now, listen, I'm not saying that he'd made swathing changes to the defense. That's not my contention. But inevitably, defense in college football changed. I do think, and this is something that the more you look into Saban, the more you study Saban, it's actually fact. Saban was well equipped for that to be an adaptation because Saban was ahead of the curve in the 80s. Saban in the 80s was begging the coaches at Ohio State and Michigan State to not play a safety that was so big that they needed to slim down their safety so that they could be better equipped for stopping heavier pass offenses. They called him crazy. He was right. Saban was a bit more well equipped for this shift in college football because as far back as the 80s, he was starting to butt heads with some of the older powers that be. If I'm not mistaken, I can't remember whether it was his time at Michigan State or Ohio State, but I believe it was his time at Ohio State. He butt heads with the head coach over how the defense would be called and how they needed to utilize defensive backs. And Saban saw what was coming on the horizon, and they didn't. So whenever college football then made that major shift again, where it went from, oh, now we're having our passing offenses of the 2000s to this wide open offense we see now, I think Nick Saban was already ready for that shift. How ready remains to be seen. I'm not Nick Saban, but his brilliance and how he designed his defense allowed that shift to happen. But he was mad about the offenses and what it meant for his defense, and he didn't like it. But you know what he did? He shifted. Because it wasn't about what he liked. It was about what wins football games. It wasn't about what he personally liked. It was about what can I do to put my players in the best positions to be successful. He had to change. The greatest coach, in my opinion, who has ever walked on a college sideline, who was already well on his way to being the GOAT, Nick Saban, while having won multiple rings, while having found wild success, took a look in the mirror and said, I have to change. And you know what that got him? More rings. And that is why I believe Saban is the GOAT. Because he saw a shift and he adapted. He adapted. And once again, we get to the NIL and transfer portal era. You might hear Nick Saban make a comment about it, but do you want to know largely what that comment is? A lot of the times it's warnings. Nick Saban adapted. Nick Saban has continually adapted, and that's what separates him from his contemporaries. That's why he's 70 plus years old, spry, sharp, and still with it, because he has been able to adapt, and that's the brilliance of Nick Saban. As much as I can talk about the brilliance of his defense, how complex it is, how good it is, how great the program building has been, it is his ability to adapt and think on the fly. That's what makes him the GOAT. Because he has seen major changes in college football, multiple major changes in college football, and he has successfully adapted to every single one of them. The reason why I bring up Nick Saban, but Okie, that's like, I hear you. Saban brings in guys that helps him to adapt. So he adapts. Right? Like that'd be like if I said, oh, the people who own that ranch, they have beautiful painted fences. And you said, oh, well, they bring in people to paint the fences. So they paint the fences. It's all the same, right? Like whether he brings someone in or not, he adapts. Right? Like that's that. No, whether it's yeah. My fault then. My fault. The problem with Dabo is his complete lack of adapting. The problem with Dabo is Dabo has gotten to a crossroads where he is unwilling to adapt. In fact, the most we've seen Dabo be willing to come off of his current position was the hiring of Riley. He still doesn't use the transfer portal. In fact, what did he say about name, image, and likeness? What did he say about it? Which, listen, I understand the quote. He says, we built this program on NIL. Swinney said amidst an early signing day, we really did. We built this program in God's name, image, and likeness. And that's great. That's great. That's great. That's great. That's awesome, right? If you built that program on your faith, that's amazing. That's amazing. That's fine. The hell does that have to do with NIL? Like that's perplexing to me. You can build your program off faith. In fact, I think it's great you do so. That's amazing. And I think it's part of the reason why you see the buy-in, why you see the kids very high on the Clemson program. That's awesome. That's awesome. Build it off faith. But what the hell does that have to do with you also being able to adapt to the times and do NIL? Because the very quote that says, oh, well, we built our program off of this, are you implying that you were the only godly program in the nation? That outside of you, it's all Sodom and Gomorrah? That's thinking of yourself rather highly, I must say. Like that's putting yourself on an awfully high pedestal. Is it really that great? Because you're not putting your players in the best position to succeed, and you're supposed to be a leader. Part of being a leader is sometimes doing things you might not want to do in order for the betterment of the people you are leading. It's ironic that you built the program off of faith, and understand this, ladies and gentlemen. I went to 8 years of Catholic school, so we want to go tit for tat on. But listen, I had to study theology twice a day, every day, 3 times on Friday, from kindergarten to 8th grade. I'm down with that argument, right? I'm here. But if you want to talk about how you built this program on NIL and say, oh, we're not using name, image, and likeness, we're using it in the name of our Lord. There are plenty of examples in the Bible, Dabo, of leaders having to do things they didn't necessarily want to do because of the betterment of the people they were leading. It's not about you. It's not about what you want. It's about the players you lead. It is not the Clemson Dabo Swinneys. It is the Clemson Tigers. Your view on NIL, whether well-placed or not, you've got to adapt. I think it's great that Dabo builds the program on faith. I think that's wonderful. I think that's awesome. And in no way, shape, or form am I encouraging him to stray away from that path, because I think the results have speak for themselves. I mean, you look at some of the coaches that have worked with Dabo, how they speak of Dabo. Listen, I think that the results speak for themselves. But this is not a mutually exclusive ideology. It's not a mutually exclusive ideology. There are other programs out there who are preaching faith and togetherness and a lot of those same principles, but they are adapting to the times. It's because they're led by leaders that understand whether I like this or not. That's not the question. What's best for those young men that, quite frankly, I walked into how many living rooms? And this is the part that kind of fires me up about Dabo. How many living rooms did you walk into and say, I'm going to take care of Timmy. I'm going to put him in the best position to succeed. Now, I have no doubt that he's taking care of those kids. I have no doubt about that. Right? That's not my contention here. I no doubt that they are in great care at Clemson. I haven't heard too much negative, right? Nothing. My arguments are not there. My arguments are, you told how many parents, I'm going to put your child in a place to be successful in life, which he may well be doing. I have no reason to expect he's not, but also on a football field. And in order to lead them on a football field, you got to do what's best for them. Yeah, Okie. Oh my God, man. I really have got to start assigning a board up here. I'm going to figure it out and assigning points on comments, because this is a great comment, Okie. Great comment. He says NIL is a good thing unless you abuse it, and Dabo should be able to bring in guys that would choose wise NIL deals. Exactly. You do have to change the way you recruit, sure. But Okie, I'm going to give you this example, right? And not just. I'm going to give you this example because you're an Oklahoma fan, and this is going to be super easy. Oklahoma has a soul mission. We can do that too, Tijuana. We can do that too, man, because there are some elite trolls, man, elite. But Oklahoma has a soul mission. I talk about how much I have been impressed with Venables and his staff's their ability to recruit. And then they implement this soul mission. And, it's been the football season, so I've been largely checked out of recruiting. But any little nuggets I get on that front, you hear players speak so highly of the soul mission, but you also hear that Oklahoma is competitive in NIL. So it's not stopping them. So, Dabo, if your understudy is, quite frankly, Dabo, if your understudy is doing it better than you right now, you might want to look in the mirror. And he's doing it better than you right now. I think it's time to look in the mirror, because you are a capable coach. You are a good coach. You do run a great program where we hear them talk about culture, and that's amazing. That's amazing to hear all these players be like, it's the culture over there. That's great. But You can have a great culture and still have a functioning NIL program. You got to. So Dabo Swinney is at an interesting crossroads because I still think he's got a lot of college football under him if he is able to adapt. But quite frankly, if you're not willing to adapt, why continue? You're only going to hurt your legacy. That's not a question for me to answer. That's not a question for any of us to answer. Hell, and it's not a question that I'm even asking facetiously in order to say, oh, you need to retire. I don't think that. You need to adapt. And if you're not willing to adapt, I think you need to ask yourself some tough questions. It's not my position to have the answers nor ask those questions, but I can point out the questions may need to be bridged. So, BV is king of the portal over Kiffin. You know, Shadow, this is an interesting question because I don't know. Here's why. BV has hit the portal real hard out of necessity. I don't think Venables necessarily wanted to utilize the portal in the manner he did, but I think Venables, to the conversation we're just having, acknowledges, doesn't matter what I want to do. I'm charged with leading the Oklahoma Sooners, and because I'm charged with leading the Oklahoma Sooners, I'm going to do whatever I think it takes to put them in the best position to succeed. So yeah, look, I mean, he's done great in the portal, but I'm interested to see, especially in the 24 cycle. So this class right here, the 25 cycle specifically, how his classes look. Yes, Gustavo, but none of them were top 10 in recruiting and top 10 in transfer portal acquisitions. Brent Venables and Nick Saban, I think, are the only two that have had more than one addition in the top 10 transfer portal and top 10 recruiting rankings. So you're right. Riley took more, or Riley had a transfer portal class that ranked number 1, and so did Coach Prime, I think, had number 2. Coach Prime also took like 32 in the transfer portal. Yeah, and that's well, Tijuana, you said it. That's the key difference here is that he's also nabbing. And in fact, Gustavo, Texas had a year where they were top 10 transfer portal acquisitions and top 10 recruiting, and that year it was Brent Venables, Steve Sarkisian, Nick Saban, the only 3 coaches in the nation to be able to boast a top 10 recruiting class and a top 10 transfer portal acquisition class. And in my opinion, listen, what Coach Prime is doing out there, that's impressive. Taking a team that's 1-11 and trying to rebuild it. Coach Riley, his work in the portal, that's impressive. But what Steve Sarkisian, Brent Venables, and Nick Saban did in the portal that year far exceeds it, in my opinion, because they were able to have both. They were able to point to their recruiting class and say, well, I can sit on this recruiting class and compete for a college football playoff game and try and win a national championship. But I also got this top 10 transfer portal class. So I think that's the key differentiation I would make, and how Venables has addressed the portal as opposed to how Lane Kiffin has used it, as opposed to how Lincoln and Coach Prime have used it. And because of that, I do think you do have an argument where you got to give him his flowers. To be able to back-to-back top 10 transfer portal and top 10 recruiting, that's very impressive. That's very impressive. Didn't Black lose a star? I have no idea. I thought Black was still a 5-star, but once again, Gustavo, I have been pretty checked out of recruiting. I thought he was a 5-star of the 24/7 Sport Composite. I go by I usually use the 247 Sports Composite because it's just the composite. He's a hell of a player though, man. Hell of a player. Black, I really was wanting him to I was really wanting Bama to make a run at him. Really wanting Bama to make a run at him. He's a very, very talented cat. Very talented. Someone is going to get a hell of a football player, man. A hell of a football player. He's one I'm going to be rooting for when he gets to college. He's very, very good. Portal star rankings are always whack. Yeah, they are. Sometimes they just have no rhyme or reason, man. To me, King of the portal is the one who chooses to use it and uses it effectively. CU, OU, and USC all had situational things. Kiffin basically used. Listen, I think if you're like putting the parameters on it, yeah, I think you can easily get to that argument. I don't think that you're misplaced, Shadow. I think that we can put parameters on this argument to be able to make a case for any of those situations. Did Arkansas fire their coach? If they did, I am not privy to it. But I would imagine Pittman is probably on the hot seat because they lost 6 straight. If they lost this weekend, I mean, Godspeed. Yeah. I think they probably got rid of Dan Enos. That was painful. Yeah, they fired the OC. They fired Enos. Wow. That Arkansas offense has been bad. Bad. And I understand they didn't have Rocket Sanders, but wow. And this is something else interesting, Mark. It's like, and I'm going to talk about this a bit later today. After this, I'm doing a video about Coach Prime's comments on the offensive line because I respect the honesty, but I have a question. And I don't have the answer to the question. So understand that. This is not me asking a loaded question. One thing I think everybody in here, and I think most of you know this about me, but just in the event that there's maybe 1 or 2 new people in here, when I ask a question, a lot of the times when you hear sport media ask questions, they're asking loaded questions. They're asking rhetorical questions. If I'm asking a question, I'm asking a question. I'm not asking a rhetorical question. I'm not asking a loaded question. I'm genuinely asking a question that I will go back on and then address and answer. My biggest question right now is, can you adequately build a national championship or a college football playoff offensive line through the transfer portal? And I don't know the answer to that. I think it's difficult because of something, Mark, you just pointed out. It's easier to just go get wide receivers, even running backs. And I know there's man running schemes versus zone running schemes, right? I know that there's a difference in that, but I think it's fairly easier to transition between the two. But whenever you talk about offensive lines, the scheme that they were just in, that like you, basically what I'm trying to say, Mark, is that when you go, and I know that I said, Mark, it's not to you, Mark. You get what I mean. It's to everybody. I'm just using your comment as a spirit guide to. You have to go out and get offensive linemen that are going to work in your scheme. And they've been developed in a different scheme. Maybe a scheme that's analogous to yours. That's what you're looking for. But what if you're in a spread concept and you get a lineman who's just like power run, like Georgia Tech, triple option, downhill? What if you get an offensive lineman that's run complete RPO concepts, so he's used to that grace period, and now you don't have that? Like, you can actually create a hole in your offensive line by someone stepping forward 3 yards, and now zoop, they're stunting right where that gap is. So I don't know the answer to that. I'm not asking a rhetorical question. I'm not asking a loaded question. I'm asking a question and trying to answer it more and more. I listen, I think the transfer portal is a great thing. That's why my question specifically revolves around the offensive line. And then to further this question, if you do assemble an offensive line through the transfer portal, how long do you need to give them? Because what if those offensive linemen came during the second transfer portal window, which is in May? So they didn't get any spring. They didn't get any of that. Now they're having to try and assemble an offensive line, and it's just patchwork. Like, so how long do you give them? So right now, Colorado, Coach Prime, they have this problem where the offensive line is not playing well, and he's like, oh, we're just going to get a new offensive line. But if you just go get a brand new offensive line, are you then going to hit the same snag next year because they haven't gelled together? Maybe you got half the offensive line in the second portal window because maybe those guys thought they would be in positions to start at their current institution. They go through spring, realize their second string. Now they hit the transfer portal. Now you have a guy that you're not going to be able to start gelling with the rest of your unit until May. What scheme did he come from? What year is he in? How developed is he already? How much are we going to have to implement? Like, basically, if you're trying to do this as a year-to-year thing, are you going to have success? I don't know. I think that the one area where, to me, it's hardest to build via the transfer portal is the offensive line. And I think it's largely because of the windows. Now that's an oversimplification. But the windows, the way they stack up, it does not allow for those guys in the second window to come in during the spring. Now, I understand why that window exists. I think that window is good. I think it's there for a purpose. That's fine. But it's just the reality of relying on the transfer portal. He said he played every offensive line in the UCLA game. That also, I think, is a problem, Bishop, because the offensive line, look, listen, I say it's a problem, but if your quarterback's getting grilled, you got to do something. So that's, what are you going to do? In a perfect world, you keep the same 5 guys in there and you let them ride it out because they need to gel, but it wasn't a perfect world. So what is Coach Prime supposed to do? Watch his son get killed? No, he's got to do something. I get that. The more yeah, what are you going to do? But once again, like, I'm so fascinated with what we're going to be seeing in the next 3 years, 4 years, 5 years from Colorado and Coach Prime because of the way he recruits. It could either revolutionize college football, or we will see that there were flaws. Either way, we're going to learn, which I find is a net positive. Either way, we're going to learn, which is always a net positive. I'm sorry I took y'all on that tangent right there. Let's go through some comments, and then we're going to get out of here. I put more stock in what I've seen from a college player against college players than high school players against people who will never play. I don't disagree with that at all, Hacker. I don't disagree with that at all. I think it's much easier to judge. I've always said this, right? Especially talking about offensive line. I'm never surprised when an offensive lineman, even if you were a 5-star, gets to a place and then you have to sit and wait a year before you ever see the field. And you hear people saying, oh, well, was he just a bust? No, not at all. But he was rated as a 5-star, and guess what? 8 games out of his year, he was handling someone like myself off the edge. I'm 5'11", 170 pounds. I would expect the 6'6" offensive tackle to handle someone my size. That's not indicative of you being some. That doesn't mean you're not a 5-star, but you get the point, right? Like it's this. It's just the theory of it. The portal is for patching holes, not building a roster. If it only works to build, if you have less for now than what you can get. And see, I agree, Tijuana, which is why I understand why Prime is doing the portal right now. It makes sense right now. That roster last year was terrible at Colorado. They were awful. Awful. And so it makes sense why he would use the portal. It's just that offensive line, man, I'm really excited to see how that works. I saw a good question up here. Ty, Denton County Independent or Burger Time Machine for a burger? Ooh. That's a good question. That's a good question, Clear. That's a really good question. Denton County, and I'm going to tell you why, because it's closer to my house. That's the only reason why. I think they're both great. I really enjoy both, but Denton County is just closer to my house. And so it's just, order of operations. It's one of those things. Yeah, I mean, no doubt. Burger Time Machine is solid, Mark. There's no doubt about that. If Burger Time Machine was closer to my house, then that would have been my answer. That's solely what I based it off of. Because it's clear, if any of you know university, it is a nightmare. I do everything I actively can to avoid university. And so if I'm going to get something to eat, it's going to be on the locations closest to my house from university. TB says portal has a high chance of unsatisfied problem players. It's good to implement, not solely rely on. You got to understand why they hit the portal. Yeah. Like, you got to understand why they hit the portal. Because not all reasons are created equal, no doubt about it. See, Clear says LSA is overrated. I don't disagree, Clear, but here's what I will say. Here's what I'll say. LSA is awesome in the sense of if I have family, because it's just me here, right? It's just me here. If my mom comes from Virginia and let's say she brings my aunts, or for instance, whenever I got married and like my brother and my sister came and they brought my nieces and nephew, LSA is an awesome place to take people to if they're not familiar with Denton, because the vibe at the LSA in Denton is very Denton-esque, right? Like it's very Denton-esque. So it's a great place to take people to because it's on the square. You can sit out up top, listen to the rooftop music. Denton Square is beautiful. So it's great for taking people to that aren't familiar with Denton. And the burgers aren't bad. They're good burgers. They're very good burgers. I do agree with you. I think LSA is a bit overrated. But it's still good. It's still good enough to where I can be like, hey, you're not from here. LSA is an awesome place. Let's go there. You'll get a good burger. You'll be on the square. All good. Where was it, Mark? Because there's I Love Sushi, which is right down the street. And then there's a really cool This stream has lost all sort of direction. You know what? That's why you come here. Because we start talking about college football. We talk about everything, including Shady Miles. Special thank you to Shady Miles, guys. I got to do my ad read, not because I have to, genuinely, because I want to. And that's not a stretch. This is a really cool company, man. Like, I'm not joking. Shady Miles, their ability to be able to put out a product that is quality while simultaneously keeping it affordable, to me, is what separates them. And that is all what it's about. Providing something wholesome, something good, and something you believe in. And I think one of the reasons why Shady Miles and myself, it's been a brand deal that's worked out rather well, is because we both function off of those same basic principles. It doesn't have to be flashy. All that matters is that you provide a wholesome content, or you provide a wholesome substance for people to be able to enjoy, and the rest will take care of itself. That's exactly what Shady Miles does. One of the oldest distilleries in the state of Kentucky. They are synonymous with Kentucky whiskey and Kentucky bourbon. Be sure to check them out because they have their rye, they have their wheat, they have you covered. Check out their website. Link in the description. Link also scrolling. They're going to get you taken care of. Right next to Fuzzy's. Rather, across the street from Fuzzy's. I don't know if I know about that place. I don't know if I know about that place, Mark. Got to put Steven on the payroll. Hey, Steven needs some bottles of Shady Mile. Steven needs some bottles of Shady Mile. He's also an enjoyer like myself. So you just wait, Steven. We're going to figure out something for you. You just wait. Check maps real quick. Yeah, there's some great places in Denton to eat. Really fantastic. Georgia versus the Field. Who are you taking? Ooh. Good question. I would probably go Field right now, Rodriguez, but let's understand this. As we're winding down, I'm going to say the Field, but I'm also going to give Georgia their props right now. Because if you're asking me my game of the week, I'm going to give it to the Dogs for how they went out there and dismantled Florida. We can have a conversation as to what type of Florida team this is, and I think it's a conversation we do need to have. The defense for Florida has been at the very least passable. And Georgia has been a little bit of a slow starter this year, and they're without arguably the best player in college football, Brock Bowers. They dismantled Florida. They beat the hell out of them. It was dirty. So I'm going to say Field, but understand this. If Georgia continues playing like that, they're tough because they're as talented as anybody in the nation. They're as well coached as anybody in the nation. Why not Georgia? right? And they're not alone. I think Michigan, I'm waiting to see Michigan really get tested. The Big Ten will take care of itself with Ohio State, Penn State, and Komodo Locos. I've heard a lot of good things, Mark. I've heard a lot of good things about that place. Now that you say it, I know exactly where it is. It's right next to Ty Ondeman. I know exactly where it is. Yeah. I've never eaten there, but I've heard really good things. Heard really, really good things. So the Big Ten will take care of itself. But I gotta say, man, Georgia, I gotta give Georgia my game of the week for how they went out there and just handled Florida. Very impressive. And Clear says, I was very impressed with Oregon. Hey, as was I, man. I said earlier in this, Clear, that I've been a Washington fanboy in terms of like what team out the Pac-12. And Jay, if you're still in here, Jay can tell you, I've been saying this since last year. What team out the Pac-12 do you think could make noise? My answer wasn't USC. My answer was actually Washington. But after Oregon lost that game to Washington, Clear, this is wild, right? This is the beautiful thing about football. And I think a lot of you are going to understand completely what I mean. And that's why you're here. I am higher on Oregon after their loss than I was before. Now, they've played great football all year, but watching them respond to that loss, or they haven't dropped a beat, it doesn't look like a loss ever happened because it doesn't look like they've been mentally phased by anything. They are even kilter. I've been very impressed with Oregon. And now I think Oregon would probably be my team that I would say, if you're watching any team out the pack, give it to Oregon. The only reason I am going to give this to Georgia, because I think you're well placed in Oregon. I think you have a beautiful argument there. I think you have a winning argument there. It's the existence or the lack of existence of Brock Bowers. How is Florida going to be able to force Georgia to get into uncomfortable situations? And how is Georgia going to be able to go forward without their safety net? And they beat the hell out of them. You gotta be perfect, man. Like, you gotta be really good. You've got to embrace. That's the beautiful thing about those two teams playing, Clear. You have to embrace this controlled chaos that occurs during the game. On Texas right now than Oklahoma's. Well, listen, Texas, good win against BYU. It was an ugly win. Very ugly win. And I know someone's going to say, good win against BYU, question mark. You got to understand, I'm also somebody that this isn't even this year. I said this last year too. BYU will sneak up on people. They're one of those teams that you'll think, oh, well, you don't have to worry about BYU. And then they will punch you square in the jaw. And you're sitting there like, what the hell? What happened? That's BYU. They just seem to do that. So you got an ugly win, but you got to win. And you were able to win in the margin you did, as ugly as the game was, which that's football. That's football. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Enjoy your Monday. We will be back this evening on our live stream, having the guys come in, anyone who's available. We're going to be talking about the games this week. Tomorrow, we're going to be highlighting Alabama LSU. We're going to talk about some of the games this coming weekend. Wednesday, there probably won't be a Through the Haze on Wednesday. Thursday, we will get right back at it to Through the Haze. You'll probably be able to find me on Thursday on the Bleacher Report app talking about some hot takes for Alabama. Friday, you can find me on the Bleacher Report app as we continue our college football pick'em show. I'm in the lead. I plan on keeping that lead, and I don't plan on looking back. Thank you all for the support. Thank you, chat. I always say this, you guys make the show what it is. But a good friend going back to high school is the first lady of Denton. I don't even know. That's wild. That's wild. I'm not even sure I know who that is. But I'm also a little bit of a hermit, Mark. I'm also a little bit of a hermit. I watch my football, I make my content, and I watch my football. And that's my life. It's a boring life, but it is my life. All right, guys. We'll see you later. That's it. See you tonight.